I call Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to join others in recognising, I think, the progress that has been made in this House in the last 24 hours on this bill, but by implication more generally. And I think Simon Bridges put it well, and if I understood him, essentially a more refined understanding of each other's positions and policies and viewpoints. I think this, certainly in my limited experience in the House, this was the best example of political parties coming from different philosophical vantage points and then bringing different policies to bear on a pretty complex subject and refining it through debate to a point where we got common ground. Let us hope that we can undertake that more often, but this certainly in my time in the House was the clearest example of that happening. I think we're winding down a little from last night. We're all a little spent on our passion on this subject, but I think it was because of that we got to where we did. And I'd like to pay tribute to colleagues, of course beginning with Minister Power, who has that quality of statesman to be able to think on one's feet metaphorically and even literally, and to adjust a position that the government has taken at the moment of timing that it is necessary. And timing is obviously everything. I wouldn't necessarily say the government has made a mistake, and if it is the case, then we all can and we all do in every party. But I would commend him and also Minister Mapp for very ably handling the subject at a critical moment on behalf of his colleague minister. And not least, the chair of our committee, Justice Committee, Chester Burrows, who let us recognise, guided this thing through and played, I think, quite a critical part behind the scenes as well in arriving at the common position that we did. I have to say it's an absolute pleasure to serve in a committee under his chairmanship, and I commend him for both his capabilities and his style of parliamentary work. And Simon Bridges, who eloquently put the government's case, and other colleagues as well. Just a couple of quick points. We got to common ground, but I do note, and it's a shame that he's not here, and that is Peter Dunn's thoughts on the matter. I don't know if others have picked up on this, but he I think made a press release this morning where he commends the position that we arrived at, and he said that he will, as I understand it, he will support it, but he still had some critique of the position. His concern, and I will take it upon myself to articulate it since he's not here, because I note his concerns with a degree of sympathy, that you could get into a situation where you have if the discretion resides with the defendant to appear in AV or not, and not appear physically, if a pattern like that arises for whatever reason, a defendant may be weak-minded or lethargic or totally indifferent, having essentially given up the ghost, or at the other extreme, a defendant or someone charged could be very wealthy and use the wealth to personal effect in a criminal trial. So his concern is that you could get a pattern of non-appearance which would undermine the principle, and I will not say anymore, Mr. Bridges, Mr. Burrows, I will not say absolute principle, but I will say constitutional principle, as I see it. So I just note Mr. Dunn's comments, and I share the concern, but insofar as he is prepared to support it, obviously, the Green Party had independently arrived at a position of support before on the basis of the Minister's moves. David Parker was making the point, and I think this is a very important point, that the New Zealand government may have got a little far out in front of other similar jurisdictions, and almost a fishing expedition to find areas of justification for the draft. he wondered about the United States, and I can certainly confirm that the United States is arguably the strongest of all in this. It's there in the US Constitution. It's there in an 1884 case. It's there in a 2004 case. It says in the United States situation it is not an absolute right, but Rule 43 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure do say that the defendant shall be present at the arraignment, at the time of plea, at every stage of the trial, including empanelment of the jury and return of the verdict and imposition of sentence. He may, however, or she may waive one's right and can be dismissed through disruptive conduct and so on. So it's clear that the United States particularly is very strong on this point. New Zealand, cases in absentia last night in the full flush of pursuit. I challenged the government to come up with the cases over the last half century that might have been in absentia. And I know that it's very limited time in which we can. Simon Bridges focused on a few, but we undertook our own research, Mr. Speaker, in the short time available. And I take this opportunity again also to pay tribute to the Parliamentary Library Service, which we and I particularly use a very great deal, and am extremely well served by the individual researchers in the Parliamentary Library. And we're able to say, based on that research, that there have been 11 cases in absentia in criminal trials, of which 4 were absconding from bail, single defendants absconding from bail. There were another 4 in a multiple defendant trial. A small minority number had not appeared. They'd absconded as well. So that's essentially 8, basically absconding from bail. There were 2 cases of illness where the judge made formed the view that the trial could proceed. And finally, there was, in 2003, I think, there was an extraordinary case where the defendant was in prison overnight before sentencing, and they'd basically forgotten the defendant and had failed to feed him or clothe him or anything. And the person was in severe distress the next day and was registered by a medical practitioner as unfit to attend the trial. Nonetheless, the judge proceeded. So that's the 11th. So we are proceeding, or we would have been proceeding, against all manner of precedent and principle in New Zealand had we gone ahead on that basis. I think that's sufficient, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to pay tribute again to the Minister for his initiative. I believe that the last Tuesday night's second reading and yesterday and last night's committee stages represented New Zealand parliamentary democracy at its best, and let us hope that we can continue that level of debate. Thank you.
I call David Garrett.